The Reformation in Ireland was a movement for the reform of religious life and institutions that was introduced into Ireland by the English administration at the behest of King Henry VIII of England. His desire for an annulment of his marriage was known as the King's Great Matter. In passing the Acts of Supremacy in 1534, the English Parliament confirmed the King's supremacy over the Church in the Kingdom of England. His challenge to papal supremacy resulted in the breach with the Roman Catholic Church. By 1541, the Irish Parliament had agreed to the change in status of the country from that of a lordship to that of the Kingdom of Ireland. Unlike similar movements for religious reform on the continent of Europe, the various phases of the English Reformation as it developed in Ireland were largely driven by changes in government policy, to which public opinion in England gradually accommodated itself. In Ireland, however, the government's policy was not embraced by the public, and the majority continued to adhere to Roman Catholicism. Norman and English monarchs used the title Lord of Ireland to refer to the Irish conquest dating from the Norman invasion of Ireland. In passing the Crown of Ireland Act in 1542, the Irish Parliament granted Henry, by his command, a new title, the King of Ireland. The state was renamed the Kingdom of Ireland. The king desired this innovation because the lordship of Ireland had been granted by the papacy, and technically he held the lordship in fief from the Pope. As Henry had been excommunicated in 1533 and again in 1538, he worried that his title could be withdrawn by his overlord, the Pope. Henry also arranged for the Irish Parliament to declare him the head of the Church in Ireland. The main instrument of state power in the establishment of the state church in the new Kingdom of Ireland was the Archbishop of Dublin, George Browne. He was appointed by the king upon the death of the incumbent, though without the approval of the Pope. A archbishop arrived in Ireland in 1536. The reforms were continued by Henry's successor, Edward VI of England. Henry's sanctions on outspoken Roman Catholics and Lutherans differed. Roman Catholics loyal to the Holy See were to be persecuted as traitors, while Lutherans, who were much rare in Ireland, were to be burnt at the stake as heretics. He promulgated the Six Articles Act in 1539. The dissolutions in Ireland followed a very different course from those in England and Wales. There were around 400 religious houses in Ireland in 1530, many more relative to the population and material wealth than in England and Wales. Now, very differently from the situation in England, in Ireland, the houses of friars had flourished in the 15th century, attracting popular support and financial endowments, and undertaking many ambitious building schemes and maintaining a regular conventual and spiritual life. They constituted around half of the total number of religious houses. Irish monasteries, by contrast, had experienced a catastrophic decline in numbers, such that by the 16th century it appears that only a minority maintained the daily religious observance of the divine office. Henry's direct authority as Lord of Ireland and from 1541 as King of Ireland only extended to the area of the Pale immediately around Dublin. From the late 1530s, his administrators temporarily succeeded in persuading some clan chiefs to adopt his policy of surrender and regrant, including the adoption of his state religion. Nevertheless, Henry was determined to carry through a policy of dissolution in Ireland, and 1537 introduced legislation into the Irish Parliament to legalize the closure of monasteries. The process faced considerable opposition and only 16 houses were suppressed. Henry remained resolute, however, and from 1541, as part of the Tudor conquest of Ireland, he continued to press for the area of successful dissolution to be extended. For the most part, this involved making deals with local lords, under which monastic property was granted away in exchange for oaths of allegiance to the new Irish crown, and consequently Henry acquired little, if any, of the wealth of the Irish houses. By the time of Henry's death in 1547, around half of the Irish monastic houses had been suppressed, but many houses of friars continued to resist dissolution until well into the reign of Elizabeth I. Henry's son, Edward VI of England, formally established Protestantism as the state religion, which was as much a religious matter as his father's Reformation had been political. His reign only lasted for 6 years, and his principal reform, the Act of Uniformity 1549, had much less impact in Ireland than in England. He abolished the crime of heresy in 1547. During his reign, attempts were made to introduce Protestant liturgy and bishops to Ireland. These attempts were met with hostility from within the church, even by those who had previously conformed. In 1551, a printing press was established in Dublin, which printed a Book of Common Prayer in English. Henry's and Edward's efforts were reversed by Queen Mary I of England, who had always been Roman Catholic. When she became queen, she imposed Roman Catholicism by the First and Second Statute of Repeal of 1553 and 1555. When some episcopal sees in Ireland became vacant, clerics loyal to Rome were chosen by Mary with the approval of the Pope. In other cases, bishops in possession of dioceses that had been appointed by a father without the approval of the Pope were deposed. She arranged for the Act of Supremacy to be repealed in 1554 and also revived the Heresy Acts. In turn, it was agreed that the former monasteries would stay dissolved so as to preserve the loyalty of those who had sinfully bought monastic lands, by an act passed in 1555 and the agreement of Pope Julius III. In Ireland, Mary started the first planned wholesale plantation of settlers from England that ironically soon came to be associated with Protestantism. In 1554, she married Philip, Prince of Asturias, who in 1558 became the King of Spain. Philip and Mary were also granted a papal bull in 1555 by Pope Paul IV to reconfirm their status as the Roman Catholic King and Queen of the new Kingdom of Ireland. Mary's Protestant half-sister, Queen Elizabeth I, succeeded in having Parliament pass another Act of Supremacy in 1559. The Act of 1534 had declared the English crown to be the only supreme head on earth of the Church of England, in place of the Pope. Any act of allegiance to the papacy was considered treasonous because the papacy claimed both spiritual and political power over its followers. Additionally, the Irish Act of Uniformity, passed in 1560, made worship in churches adhering to the Church of Ireland compulsory. Anyone who took office in the Irish Church or government was required to take the oath of supremacy. Penalties for violating it included hanging and quartering. Attendance at Church of Ireland services became obligatory. Those who refused to attend, whether Roman Catholics or Protestant nonconformists, could be fined and physically punished as recusants by the civil powers. Initially, Elizabeth tolerated non-Anglican observance, but after the promulgation in 1570 of the papal bull Regnans in Excelsis, Roman Catholics were increasingly seen as a threat to the security of the state. Nevertheless, the enforcement of conformity in Ireland was sporadic and limited for much of the 16th century. The issue of religious and political rivalry continued during the two Desmond Rebellions and the 9 Years' War, both of which overlapped with the Anglo-Spanish War, during which some rebellious Irish nobles were helped by the papacy and by Elizabeth's archenemy Philip II of Spain. Due to the unsettled state of the country, Protestantism made little progress, unlike in Celtic Scotland and Wales at the time. It came to be associated with military conquest, and it was therefore hated by many. The political or religious overlap was personified by Adam Loftus, who served as Archbishop and as Lord Chancellor of Ireland. The bulk of Protestants in Ireland during Elizabeth's reign were confined to the ranks of New Settlers and government officials, who formed a small minority. Amongst the native Gaelic Irish and Old English, recusancy predominated, and was tolerated by Elizabeth for fear of alienating the Old English further. To them, the official state religion had already changed several times since 1533, and might as well change again, as Elizabeth's heir until 1587 was the Roman Catholic Mary, Queen of Scots. Elizabeth established Trinity College Dublin in 1592, partly in order to train clergy to preach their Reformed faith. In 1571, a Gaelic printing typeface was created and brought to Ireland by dignitaries of St. Patrick's Cathedral, Dublin, to print documents in the Irish language for the purposes of evangelization. The liturgy that was intended to be printed was to be used for the preaching in Irish in specifically appointed churches in the main town of every diocese. The first translation of the New Testament into Irish was done in 1603, and a translation of the Gospels was sponsored by Richard Boyle.